At 5:47 a.m., before the federal facility at Quantico Base Echo came alive, she was already on the upper corridor, the one no one used. Her name on the roster was Sarah Chen, logistics coordinator. No one questioned her presence. She moved through the building the way ghosts move through walls, with perfect knowledge of where cameras didn't reach, where protocols had blind spots, where exhausted night shift guards weren't watching. The recruits called her the woman in the grey hoodie. They didn't know her last name. They didn't know that every morning at 6 a.m. she taught them things. Pressure point recognition, rapid casualty assessment, how to move through a building with your mind before your body followed, how to keep someone breathing when the world was collapsing around you. These weren't official seminars. There was no budget line, no director's approval, no documentation. For 3 years, she had been doing this in absolute silence. But on the morning of the live fire exercise, when everything went wrong, when Agent Marcus Webb collapsed in the West Corridor with a compound fracture and hemorrhagic shock, when the facility's trauma surgeon was 23 minutes away, when the 4 senior agents who found her standing over Webb's body realized that the woman calmly controlling the bleed and calling out vitals in a voice like ice and steel was the same person they'd read about in classified files, the person who was supposed to be dead. Everything changed. What they didn't know was that she had stopped dying a long time ago. She had simply learned to keep others alive instead. Chapter 1. The Quiet Hours. The fluorescent lights hummed at precisely 60 hertz. Sarah had learned to use that sound as a metronome, chest compressions, breath counts, the rhythm of staying alive. She stood in the empty training room at 5:52 a.m., watching the dawn try to break through the reinforced glass. The facility was designed to break people. Concrete corridors, locked doors at every junction, surveillance that never blinked. She knew every camera's blind spot because she had learned to see the world that way in Kandahar, in a forward operating base where the only light came from muzzle flashes and the only sound that mattered was a heartbeat. 5 minutes later, they started arriving. Agent Rivera was first, young, 26, biceps carved from ambition and anxiety. He had failed the fitness test twice. He was terrified of water. She would fix that. Then came Keisha Morris, who had a photographic memory but froze under pressure. The other recruits didn't know she had watched Keisha sit in the bathroom stall for 30 minutes during last week's drill, hyperventilating. Sarah did. Then Marcus Webb, tall, confident, the kind of agent who thought pain was something that happened to other people. He had been careless during a weapons check last week, sloppy footwork, divided attention. Sarah had made a note. And finally, James Chen, no relation though they shared the same face shape, the same tired eyes. James was 34, which made him old for field work. He had been military once. She could always tell. It was in the way he held his spine, like it was carrying weight no one else could see. "Why are we here?" Rivera asked, already breathing hard. "Because," Sarah said quietly, "the morning drills don't teach you what you need to know." She had them run scenarios, not the choreographed ones that got filed in reports, real ones. Hypotheticals where a partner went down, where blood wouldn't stop, where the radio was dead and you were alone with someone's life in your hands. She had them practice pressure points on each other. She showed them how to recognize shock in the eyes of someone you loved. She taught them the difference between panic and preparedness. It was just information and practice. Repeated until thinking stopped and instinct began. "You're wasting time," Webb said once during the 3rd week. "This isn't in the manual." Sarah looked at him for 3 seconds. "The manual," she said, "was written by people who survived. If you want to be one of them, you'll be here tomorrow at 6. He was there at 5:58 a.m. By the 3rd month, they didn't ask questions anymore. They just showed up, sweat-soaked and terrified and grateful, because something in her voice told them that she wasn't teaching them tricks. She was teaching them how to live when dying was the easier choice. She never spoke about herself. When Rivera asked where she had learned this, she changed the subject. When Keisha mentioned she recognized some of the protocols from case files, Sarah simply said, "Then you already know they work," and moved on. But James Chen watched her, really watched her. The way she moved, precise, economical, like someone who had crossed difficult ground and knew the cost of every wasted motion. The way her hands moved over Webb's collarbone when she demonstrated CPR. Not clinical, but intimate, like she was negotiating with his body directly. The scar on her left forearm, thin and white and very old. He recognized the shape of someone carrying secret knowledge. He had been that person once. On the morning of the exercise, Sarah was explaining the difference between a tactical withdrawal and a panic retreat when Webb's pager went off. Code red, the facility's alarm system, a drill, they were told. But Sarah heard something else in the alert tone. She heard the word catastrophe. "Go," she told them. "Show them what you know." What she didn't say, "I taught you this so you wouldn't come back in a body bag." What she didn't say, "I have done this before, and I am not letting anyone die today." Chapter 2. The Exercise. The West Corridor was supposed to be clear. It wasn't. The scenario was a breach simulation. Hostile entry, civilian casualties, maximum chaos. The facility's trauma surgeon, Dr. Raymond Walsh, was observing from the command center. The exercise was designed to test response time, coordination, and decision-making under fire. No one told them that the air filtration system would malfunction at exactly 10:43 a.m., that a mock explosion would trigger a structural support to partially collapse, that Agent Marcus Webb would be standing directly underneath it. Sarah was 3 floors away when she heard the impact. She didn't hear the alarm. She didn't hear the sirens that followed. She heard something older, a frequency that had lived in her body for 15 years, the sound of structural failure, the sound of bodies being broken. She moved toward it. Protocol said she shouldn't be in the exercise area. Protocol said she was a logistics coordinator with no authorization for active drills. Protocol said a lot of things, but protocols are written by people who have never watched someone die, because they followed a rule instead of their instinct. The West Corridor was chaos, dust in the air, fluorescent panels hanging from the ceiling like broken teeth, and on the concrete floor, 20 meters from where emergency response should have already arrived, was Webb. His left leg was bent at an angle that legs shouldn't bend. Blood was pooling beneath him, moving slowly, which meant his heart was still pumping, but didn't have much time left to keep doing it. Sarah dropped to her knees beside him, already assessing. Compound fracture, definitely. Femoral artery, probably. The dust in the air was still settling, which meant this had happened maybe 90 seconds ago. The trauma surgeon was upstairs. The emergency medical team was 2 floors below, still moving, still thinking about protocol. Webb's eyes were open. He was conscious. That was the cruelest part. "Sarah," his voice was thin, "what are you—" She already had his left pant leg cut open, already had her hands on the femoral artery, feeling for the bleed, already knew exactly what she was going to do. "Stay with me," she said, in the voice she used to use in the field. Not comfort, certainty. "I've got you." That was when 4 agents appeared in the corridor. Rivera, Morris, James, and a trainee named Jackson. They saw her hands covered in blood, working with precision and speed. They saw her fingers finding pressure points like she had been born knowing where they were. They saw her mouth moving, calling out numbers, blood pressure dropping, oxygen saturation falling. "We need a tourniquet now. Someone get me gauze." And she wasn't asking. She was commanding, and they moved because in that moment, she wasn't a logistics coordinator. She was something else entirely. James Chen's face went still. He had seen combat medical officers move like that. He had seen people whose hands knew anatomy the way other people knew their own names. He had seen exactly one woman move with that precision. Back in 2010, in a forward base in Helmand Province, keeping people alive in 30-second intervals between IED blasts, he had been told that woman was dead. Classified accident, casualty list, closed file. He was looking at her. Chapter 3. The Quiet Heroism. In Story CTA. Comment where you're watching from. Let's see how far the stories of real courage and silent sacrifice can travel. Webb's leg was elevated. The tourniquet was tight, tight enough to stop the bleeding, not tight enough to destroy tissue. Sarah had already called for immediate surgical intervention, giving the trauma surgeon specifics. Compound fracture, femoral artery compromise, tourniquet applied at 10:47 a.m., 2 liters of saline drip, type O negative standing by. The surgeon, Dr. Walsh, arrived at the same moment the emergency medical team did. He took one look at the tourniquet application, the pressure dressing, the way the wound was managed, and something in his face shifted. These weren't amateur first aid markings. This was combat medicine. This was someone who had done this in the field, under fire, with lives depending on her speed. He looked at Sarah's hands, then at her face. "I have this," he said quietly, taking over the wound assessment, but his eyes were asking questions. Sarah stepped back. She was already moving to the periphery, becoming invisible again, which was what she did best. Except James Chen had moved to block her path. "Don't," he said. It wasn't a question. It was a command from someone who recognized authority when he saw it. "I'm done here," Sarah said flatly. "You're Sarah Chen, logistics coordinator at this facility for 3 years. You have no emergency medical certification on file. You have no authorization to perform field medicine, and you just saved Marcus Webb's life using protocols that don't exist in any training manual." James stepped closer. "So, before you disappear again, you're going to tell me who you actually are." Rivera, Morris, and Jackson were watching now. The facility staff were arriving. In seconds, there would be paperwork, investigations, questions that would spiral into classified briefings. Sarah could feel it, the weight of exposure, the moment when invisibility ends. She took a breath. The fluorescent lights hummed. Somewhere, an ambulance was wailing its way toward the facility. "My name is Sarah Chen," she said finally. "That part is real. The rest of it, the protocols I taught you, the training in the mornings, the reason I knew exactly how to stop that bleed, that's classified. And if you press me on it here, in front of this many people, I walk out the front gate and you'll never know why I was really here." "You were teaching us," Keisha Morris said, stepping forward. "You were teaching us things that weren't in any official curriculum. You were preparing us." "For what?" James asked. Sarah looked at each of them. These 4 people who had shown up every morning at 6, who had trusted her with their lives in a small, undocumented way, who had learned that compassion and precision weren't separate things. They were the same muscle, used differently. "For the day when someone is dying," she said, "and the protocols don't matter anymore. When it's just you and someone else's life, and the only thing between them and nothing is what you know and what you're willing to do." She looked at James directly. "You were at Forward Base Kandahar in 2010. You remember the medic, the one who kept the whole battalion alive on blood and stubbornness." His face went white. "That wasn't me," Sarah said quietly, "but I was trained by people who learned from her. I was trained by people who understood that you don't save lives for medals or recognition. You save them because not saving them means carrying that weight forever." The ambulance was getting closer. "Webb's going to be okay," she said. "Your training kept him alive long enough. The rest is on Dr. Walsh now." She looked at James. "If you're smart, you'll forget you figured out who I am, because the moment this goes up the chain, I'm gone. and the morning training stops. And the next time one of you is in a situation where you need to know how to keep someone breathing, you'll be alone." Rivera made a sound like he was about to protest. Sarah turned to him. "You failed fitness twice," she said. "Tomorrow, you're going to pass it. Not because you got stronger, because you learned that you can do impossible things when you're not thinking about failure. You learned that from the training." She paused. "If they shut it down, you lose that." She looked at each of them. "So you choose. Report this. Watch the facility lock down the West Wing, investigate my credentials, discover I was here under a false authorization, and probably get myself arrested. Or you come back tomorrow at 6 a.m., and we never speak about this again." The paramedics were entering the corridor now, moving with controlled urgency. James Chen was still watching her, and in his eyes, Sarah saw something she hadn't let herself feel in years. Recognition. The knowledge that someone else understood the weight she was carrying. 6 a.m., he said finally. Rivera nodded. Morris nodded. Jackson, still shocked, nodded. Sarah turned toward the paramedics, already stepping out of their way, already becoming part of the background again. But as she moved, she felt something shift in her chest. These 4 people had figured out who she was, and instead of running, she had stayed. She had told them the truth. For the first time in 3 years, she had let someone see her. Chapter 4. The Recognition. The investigation into the exercise collapse took 47 hours. Dr. Raymond Walsh's official report noted that Agent Webb's survival was due to immediate emergency intervention by an unidentified facility staff member. The report did not name Sarah. The report did not detail her methods. The report existed in that liminal space where bureaucracy acknowledges something happened but keeps the details sealed. What the report did do was trigger a review of facility protocols, which meant, inevitably, someone opened a file. Someone cross-referenced the medic who had applied the tourniquet with the personnel roster. Someone found inconsistencies. Sarah's authorization to work at the facility was flagged at 4:33 a.m. on the 3rd day. She knew it was coming. She had always known. Invisibility has an expiration date. The moment you save someone's life visibly, the moment you do something that can't be ignored, your clock starts ticking. She went to the morning training anyway. At 5:47 a.m., she was in the empty corridor on the upper floor, waiting. James Chen arrived first, which wasn't surprising. He was military. Military people understand about showing up when it matters. "It's over," he said. It wasn't a question. 48 hours, Sarah confirmed. Maybe 60. Then they'll come with questions, and the answers I give will require authorization levels that my current employment doesn't have. So they'll refer me to someone else, and that someone else will refer me to a classified briefing, and at that point, I stop being Sarah Chen, logistics coordinator. She looked at him. "The morning training ends today." "Then teach us everything," Rivera said, appearing in the doorway. Morris and Jackson behind him. They all showed up. They knew it was the last day. They didn't need it said. Sarah took them through a scenario they had never done before. A complete medical emergency. Multiple casualties. No backup. Equipment failures. The works. She had them work in teams. She had them make decisions that had no good answer. She had them hold hands with people who were dying in their arms and keep the compressions going anyway. By 7:15 a.m., they were exhausted and shaking, and had learned more than most combat medics learned in a year. "There's one thing you need to understand," Sarah said, sitting on the edge of the training table, "about why this matters, about why I've been teaching you in the dark instead of through official channels." She paused. "The system protects itself. The protocols protect the institution. But compassion, real compassion, The kind where you're willing to break rules and risk yourself to keep one person alive. That has to come from somewhere else. That has to come from knowing that another human's life is worth more than your career. James was listening with an intensity that suggested he was storing every word. "You're not going to save lives because the manual tells you to," Sarah continued. "You're going to save them because you learned in this room that it was possible, that you could do it, that you were capable of holding someone's life in your hands and not letting go." She looked at each of them. "That's the gift you're taking with you." Morris had tears in her eyes. "What happens to you?" Sarah smiled, actually smiled, which she almost never did. "Something happens to all of us eventually. We stop running and we face what we were running from." She paused. "Mine just happens to be classified." At 7:44 a.m., the facility director's office called her. She was being released from duty pending a security review. She was to report to a classified briefing location at 2 p.m. She packed her personal items, a change of clothes, a photograph she had kept since 2010, a book of poetry that no one knew she read, and walked out of the facility the same way she had walked in 3 years ago, invisible. What she didn't know was that James Chen had made a phone call. Chapter 5. The Old Debts. The classified briefing was in a building that didn't exist on any map. Sarah had been to enough of these to know the ritual, the grey walls, the fluorescent lights, the men in suits who asked questions with the tone of people reading a script written by someone else. What she didn't expect was to see someone she recognized, General Marcus Reeves, retired. She had served under him in 2009. He had been there when the IED went off. He had been the one who called her military service completed, which was bureaucratic language for, "We're going to tell people you're dead because the alternative is admitting what you did." He was sitting in the briefing room, looking older, looking like he had been carrying something heavy. "Sarah," he said, and his voice was the same as she remembered, measured, careful, carrying the weight of command decisions. "I didn't think I'd be seeing you again." "Sir," she sat across from him, "I suppose I've become a security concern." "You've become visible," he said, "which means we need to make a choice about what to do with you." He leaned forward. "Why were you training those agents? The real reason." Sarah didn't look away. "Because in 3 years of working at that facility, I watched young people get sent into the field without knowing that the protocols they were trained with were written in conference rooms by people who have never had to keep someone alive on the bathroom floor of a safe house. I watched them lose people. I watched them break, and I started asking myself, what if they knew? What if they understood that saving a life isn't about following the manual? It's about being willing to do the impossible when the impossible is the only option left." Reeves listened. He didn't interrupt. "So I taught them," Sarah continued, "in the dark, without authorization, because I was already dead officially. So what did it matter if I broke a few rules?" "It matters," Reeves said slowly, "because you were breaking them for the right reasons. And someone noticed, someone in the director's office noticed that you knew exactly how to apply combat medicine, and they flagged it. And that flag went up the chain, and it reached someone who knew what you'd done in Kandahar." Sarah's jaw tightened. "What I did in Kandahar was classified." "Correct. You kept 12 soldiers alive who should have died. You operated outside of medical protocol because the protocols were designed for peacetime casualties, not for what we were actually facing. You were officially reprimanded for it." Reeves paused. "And you were also asked to leave the military because you were a liability. Because the system doesn't know what to do with people who care more about life than about procedure." Sarah felt something sharp in her chest. Anger, maybe, or the absence of the armor she had been wearing for so long. "So what are you here to tell me?" she asked. That I violated protocol again? That I'm under arrest? Reeves leaned back. I'm here to tell you that James Chen made a phone call to someone he knows in the intelligence community. And he asked a very specific question. Is there a way to keep Sarah Chen employed without letting her disappear again? Sarah froze. He told them about the training, about what you taught those agents, about Webb's survival. And he told them that if they were smart, they would formalize it instead of shutting it down. Reeves smiled slightly. He said you were too valuable to lose twice. I don't understand. We're creating a position, Reeves said. Advanced medical protocol development. Classified. You would train tactical units in field medicine, real field medicine, not the sanitized version we usually teach. You'd have authorization. You'd have a team. You'd have resources. He paused. You'd be working for the government again, officially. Sarah felt something in her that had been locked down for 3 years start to unfold. They want me to keep training people. They want you to keep saving lives, Reeves corrected. Because the system is finally admitting what it always knew, that the best medicine isn't taught in manuals. It's taught by people who have held another person's life in their hands and refused to let go. Chapter 6. The Acceptance, in Story CTA. If this story has already moved you, hit the like button. It helps more people discover stories of compassion and duty. Sarah took the position. Within 6 months, she had assembled a team. James Chen was her second in command after she learned that his military medical training had been extensive and secret, that he had been a combat surgeon in a previous life, that he understood exactly what she was trying to build. Rivera became her field trainer. Morris became her research coordinator. Jackson went back to field work, but came back every month to teach newer recruits. The training program expanded. They established protocols that were used across 7 different agencies. Sarah began publishing papers, under a pseudonym, but publishing nonetheless, about field medicine in non-traditional settings. They were cited, they were referenced. Her work was saving lives that she would never know about. But the real work happened in the grey room on the 3rd floor of the building that didn't exist, where young agents and medics showed up expecting protocol and found humanity instead. One morning, about a year into the new position, a young woman named Katie sat across from Sarah in the training room. Katie was small, fierce, and terrified. She had failed every psychological evaluation that came with military medical training. She was being pushed out. Sarah recognized her immediately. Recognized the shape of someone carrying too much, someone who had seen something that wouldn't let her sleep. "You're afraid of failing people," Sarah said quietly. Katie didn't deny it. "I froze during a real casualty response. Someone needed CPR and I couldn't move. They died." Her voice was barely audible. "I'm not qualified to be a medic." Sarah had heard this speech before. She heard it every month from someone new. The voice of someone who believed that one mistake meant permanent disqualification, that one failure meant you shouldn't try again. "Show me your hands," Sarah said. Katie held them out. They were shaking. "My hands shake too," Sarah said. She held her own hands up. They were perfectly steady. "But not because of training, because of what I've seen, because of people I couldn't save." She paused. "The difference between me and someone who quit is that I stopped believing my hands were supposed to be still. I started believing they were supposed to work anyway." She had Katie practice on a dummy for hours, not because repetition was going to make her hands stop shaking, but because repetition was going to teach her body that her hands could function even when terror was running through her system. By day 5, Katie moved through a casualty scenario without freezing. By day 15, she was teaching other recruits. By day 30, she was volunteering for field deployment. On her last day before leaving, Katie hugged Sarah. Actual physical contact, something that Sarah had stopped believing she deserved. "Thank you," Katie said. for not letting me quit. After Katie left, Sarah sat in the grey room with the fluorescent lights humming around her, and she let herself feel something she had been running from for 15 years. Gratitude, purpose, the knowledge that carrying other people's weight could be redemptive instead of destructive. Chapter 7. The Late Revelation. One afternoon, while Sarah was reviewing training reports, James Chen came into her office with something that made her look up sharply. It was a classified file. The red stripe across the front meant it was military-level authorization. "You asked me once why I ended up at that facility," James said, sitting down across from her desk. "Why I was working as an agent when I had a medical background." "You were hiding," Sarah said, "like I was." "I was running," he corrected, "from something specific, a decision I made in the field, a casualty." He opened the file. "I was assigned to a forward operating base in 2010, Kandahar province. I was supposed to be a medical consultant, except the base medic was someone extraordinary, someone who didn't follow protocol, someone who was willing to lose her career to keep people alive." Sarah's chest felt tight. "I watched her keep people alive," James continued. "I watched her do things that weren't in the manual. I watched her get in arguments with officers about procedure when she knew that procedure would kill someone." He looked at her directly. "I watched you, Sarah. I was there. I remember you." Sarah said nothing. "When you were reassigned," James said, "when they sent you home and told you that you were a security risk, I thought, that's the end of that. That's the end of someone trying to save people." He paused. "But then I ended up at that facility. And one morning I saw someone moving through the corridors the same way that Medic had moved through the base, and I thought, she's here, somehow she's here, and she's still trying." He closed the file. "I made that phone call to Reeves because I realized something. You weren't hiding from the system because you were running from it. You were hiding because the system had already failed you, and I wasn't going to let it happen again." Sarah felt something shift in the architecture of her grief, something that she had believed was fixed, that she had failed, that she had been rejected, that she didn't belong, began to bend. "I've spent 3 years," James said, "watching you teach people how to be brave, and I realized that the reason you could teach them is because you're still brave. You're still trying. You just do it quietly now, where it won't get you arrested." He stood up. "You should know that you matter, that the thing you did in Kandahar, and the thing you did at the facility, and the thing you're doing now, it all matters. You're not invisible, Sarah. You're just good at seeing yourself that way." After he left, Sarah sat alone with the file, with the name of the base, with the date that she had spent 15 years believing was the end of her career. She opened the file and looked at the documentation, every commendation she had received, every time she'd been told her methods were outside protocol, every instance of her being flagged as a security concern. And she realized she had been reading it all wrong. They weren't calling her a problem. They were documenting her as extraordinary. The system had been afraid of her not because she was broken, but because she was threatening to something that the system believed about itself. She had kept people alive, not because she followed rules, because she refused to let people die. Chapter 8. The Rising Truth. 6 months after James showed her the file, Sarah received a visit. It was the director of the facility where the exercise collapse had happened. Dr. Raymond Walsh was with him. They came to her office in the building that didn't exist. They sat in the grey room with the fluorescent lights, and they asked her a question that she hadn't expected. "We want to publicly acknowledge what you did," the director said. "Not fully, or the security clearance restrictions prevent that. But we want to honor it, and we want to use your methods as the foundation for a new medical protocol across all federal agencies." Sarah felt vertigo. Public acknowledgement means the classified elements of my history become visible. Some of them, Dr. Walsh agreed. We're not going to release everything, but we are going to say that there is an instructor with classified military medical background who has developed innovative approaches to field medicine that have saved an estimated 300 lives in the past 18 months. Sarah had never thought in terms of numbers. She had thought in terms of individual people. 300 felt impossible. We're also recommending you for a civilian commendation, the director said. It won't be military rank, but it will be official. It will be documented. It will say that you served with distinction and that your contributions have value. Sarah realized she was shaking. I was told I was a security risk, she said quietly. You were, Dr. Walsh said gently. Because the military doesn't know how to categorize someone who cares more about keeping people alive than keeping the system comfortable. That's not a flaw, Sarah. That's exactly what we need. They left her the paperwork, the proposal, the draft of the public commendation that would go into official record after the classified review was complete. For the first time in 15 years, Sarah Chen wasn't invisible. She was being documented as essential. Chapter 9. The Epilogue. Final chapter CTA. Subscribe for more stories of courage, healing, and redemption. Thank you for watching the case of Sarah Chen. See you in the next one. The ceremony happened on a grey November morning, not at the facility where everything had started. That building was too compromised now. Too many protocols had been revealed. Instead, it happened in a federal building in Washington, in a room with oak paneling and photographs of presidents on the walls. Sarah wore a dark suit. She had never been comfortable in formal clothing. James Chen stood beside her, and Rivera and Morris and Jackson. Katie was there too, now working as a certified field medic. Dr. Walsh stood at the podium. The citation was read. It didn't say everything. It couldn't say that Sarah had operated outside protocol, that she had trained recruits in secret, that she had been officially presumed dead and then resurrected by paperwork. But it said that she had served with distinction, that her medical innovations had been adopted across federal agencies, that she had saved lives through courage and expertise. The photograph they released showed her standing in the training room, hands on a trauma dummy, explaining pressure points to an agent whose face was blurred for security reasons. In the photograph, she didn't look invisible. She looked like someone who had found her place. After the ceremony, Sarah stood alone in the hallway. A young woman approached her, couldn't have been more than 25, wearing a field medic's uniform. "Ma'am," the young woman said, "I just wanted to thank you. I'm with the agency in Denver. Your protocol training saved my partner's life during a field operation. I wanted you to know that what you're doing matters." Sarah felt something soften in her chest that she thought had calcified years ago. "What's your name?" Sarah asked. Emma Rodriguez." "Emma," Sarah said, "keep doing the work. When the protocols try to contain you, when the system tries to make you small, keep doing the work anyway. The people who survive because of you will remember, and that's the only memorial that matters." Emma nodded and left, and Sarah stood in the hallway of the federal building, listening to the echo of footsteps and the hum of heating systems, and she realized something that had taken 15 years and a lot of darkness to understand. She was no longer running. She was standing still, and the world was finally seeing her. Some healers don't wait for permission. They move in the quiet hours before dawn. They hold other people's lives with trembling hands and refuse to let go. They break protocols and face judgment because the weight of another person's survival matters more than staying comfortable. And when the world finally catches up, when the bureaucracy finally understands what it was trying to contain, the healer is already ready for the next person who needs saving. Sarah Chen walked back out into the morning light. Her phone was already ringing. There was a new trainee arriving next week, someone who had frozen in the field, someone who thought they didn't belong. She had 4 days to teach them that belonging isn't something you wait for. It's something you build with other people's lives, one heartbeat at a time.